My name is Evan Matei. I am currently a sergeant with the Frisco Police Department, assigned to our Community Services and Media Relations Division. Most importantly, though, I am a father to my daughter, Emily, and I've been married to one of the most amazing women for the past 16 years, Erin.
Tell us about what it was like to be on the police force during 2020.
I remember getting a text message from a friend of mine with a screenshot of the news breaking that the first North Texas COVID patient resided in Frisco. And then it hit me, okay, well, this is here, this is real. What is this gonna mean for us? You know, between March and Memorial Day weekend, you know, we had people lining up to support us. And in large part, that's something that the Frisco Police Department very greatly enjoys, is the support from our community. And almost overnight, the events that were over 1,000 miles away changed that for us. The death of George Floyd, at least in my immediate circle, I know that it really shook us. We knew that we were now going to have to answer those tough questions. And that the questions were about to be tougher, and that we were going to have to be more transparent than we've ever been. But because we had invested already into the relationship with our community, you know, we were able to successfully take a stand against police brutality and recognize the pain that that George Floyd's death caused members of our community. I think one of the biggest things that I learned was what true empathy looks like, and to really consider the other side of the coin. You know, if it's my wife or child that's stopped, how do I want the police officer to treat them? So I think one of the things that makes me proud is that our department was willing to say that what happened in the death of George Floyd was wrong. We worked with protesters that really wanted to see justice done. We were able to have the opportunity to stand with them. And say, you know what, you're right, police brutality is wrong. And at Frisco, we're not going to stand for officers doing that. One of the coolest things that happened in one of those protests was captured by a photographer named Kelly Clark. And Kelly captured a moment where one of the demonstrators in one of the protests came up to one of our lieutenants and gave him just a high five handshake. And with her permission, we submitted it to the United States Department of Justice Office of Community Policing as a photo contest for community policing in action. And that photo was actually featured as a winner this past June. To be able to have that showcased on a national stage was something I feel is pretty special, and something that I'm proud to wear the Frisco uniform because of that.
Let me ask you a super personal question. You're a follower of Jesus.
Yeah.
And you're a law enforcement officer. How does your faith in Jesus impact and influence what you do every day?
To me, Jesus' example is to really demonstrate love to everybody. You know, love God and love your neighbor. And when, as a police officer, you realize and internalize that everyone is your neighbor, you do your best to act like Jesus. I think one of the most important things to know is that, you know, police officers are not robots. We care deeply about our community, and we care deeply about keeping good people safe.
Well, on behalf of all of Preston Trail Community Church, I want to say thank you.
Thank you.
It was a joy to be in the home of Evan Matei and to be able to talk to him about that. And my very favorite statement he made was right at the end when he said, police officers are not robots. And that's certainly how all of us would want people to feel about our jobs, that when we suit up for whatever we do, that we're not robots. And, they are really just humans who have chosen a job. I think many of them would even say accepted what they believe is a call, and it involves them being exposed to danger. And that is true for all law enforcement officers and for all first responders, firefighters, paramedics, EMTs. It's true for all healthcare professionals, whether in the medical world, the dental world, pharmaceutical world, therapy world. And so today we celebrate these two big umbrella groups of people who have served so well, first responders, healthcare professionals, for all the courage they showed, all the sacrifices they've made for us. And as we celebrate them, we also are listening for the voice of God to speak to all of us who likely will not show that kind of crazy courage and make those kind of wild sacrifices. And yet God still calls us every day to live lives of courage. Courage, one of the most important aspects of all of human life. Centuries ago, even millennia ago, in ancient Greek thought, they talked about 4 cardinal virtues. Now, we don't use the word virtue much, but it just means a really good quality, right? A virtuous person. It's the opposite of a vice. And so these 4 cardinal virtues were called justice, self-control, wisdom, and courage. Meaning, if you kept those 4 traits and developed those 4 character qualities, you would become a truly virtuous, a good person. How do you become a good person? Practice those 4 virtues. So courage has been held in the highest regard for thousands of years. And when I talk about courage, here's what I mean. Courage is the strength to face something that is difficult or dangerous rather than withdraw. That is, often in life, many times in life, we will come to a fork in the road and we will have to either choose to withdraw if there's a dangerous moment or a difficult moment in front of us, or we will choose to engage. When we choose to engage, it will call for courage. Now, courage is sometimes so ethereal, it's sometimes so glamorized that we forget to understand what it truly is. Let me share 2 insights I've received over the years that I'll pass on to you today that I hope will expand your understanding and deepen your understanding of courage. The first comes from a British Christian 100 years ago, G.K. Chesterton. He wrote, "Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. It means a strong desire to live, taking the form of a readiness to die." Interesting. I love that. Think about the person that goes into the military. Almost none would say, "Hey, I sure hope I die." But they would all say, "But I'm willing to die for my country." No one goes into a job in life, I think, saying, "I sure hope I die." But some jobs call for such courage that you are ready to die. You desire to live, but if necessary, you will die. I think that's a great insight. Helps us keep the tension. The second comes from C.S. Lewis, who said it this way: "Courage is not simply one of those 4 virtues, but rather it is the form of every virtue at the testing point, a point where you will be tested. You cannot practice any of the other virtues very long without bringing this one into play." So think about the other virtues. Justice was the first one. If you're going to practice justice, at some point, you are going to be pushed to no longer be just. There will be voices that will tell you to stop trying to make that injustice right. And it will take courage to continue to be just. Self-control was another one of the virtues. If you find yourself really seeking to practice self-control in your life and not let lusts just run you over and have their way in your life, then at some point it's going to take incredible courage to say no to what feels good at the moment, but will wreck your life. Or take the other example, which is wisdom. When you and I choose to practice wisdom in life, at some point there will be others, naysayers, who will criticize us and make fun of us and say, "You're so foolish." And we're saying it's not foolishness, it's wisdom. And at that point, it will take courage to keep on living out wisdom. I believe when we understand courage at this deeper level with the insights of Chesterton and Lewis, we can then begin to talk about the 2 kinds of courage that are before us in life. These 2 kinds of courage, first, are exceptional courage. You might also call this extraordinary courage. Exceptional courage is when you sacrifice your life for another person. You literally are ready to sacrifice, and you actually do sacrifice your welfare, your health, your success, those things that you own, your goods, your worldly goods, including even your life's blood, for another person. And today's heroes whom we are celebrating have shown exceptional courage. They began it as soon, they'd probably done it their whole lives, but we saw it especially when COVID began in March of 2020, and they have not stopped yet. So let's talk about and thank God for each of these groups. First, healthcare professionals. Over the last 18 months, they have cared for the health needs of people with a rare virus that wasn't even initially identified. They've done that in their offices. They've done that in crazy emergency rooms. They have done that in urgent care clinics. They've done that in hospitals. They've done that in nursing homes. They've done it in rehab centers. And in some cases, they've gone all the way into the people's homes. And by the way, while they're caring for people with COVID, they're also caring for all of us who didn't have COVID issues but still needed to see a doctor or a dentist. It's not like every single potential health issue in your life went on hold during COVID. You still had to have help, just like I did in other areas of life, and these healthcare professionals were caring for us even then. They had to maintain an up to then unknown, extraordinary level of cleaning, disinfecting, and hygiene to protect themselves and their patients. And in the process, they gave the highest level of care to each of us. What I'm saying is, healthcare professionals risked their own welfare and were willing to risk their own lives on behalf of all of us. That is exceptional courage. First responders is the other group today that we pay homage to. Firefighters, EMTs, paramedics, consistently in answering urgent health calls, gave life-giving emergency care in life-threatening situations. They've always done that, but now all of a sudden, COVID was added to the mix. It was either in the background or in the forefront. And in the minds of many, perhaps most of those particular groups of folks, they had to ask as they went into someone's home, I wonder if this is the day I'm going to catch COVID. I wonder if this is the day that I will have to go into quarantine because I have now been infected. Now, law enforcement officers are also a part of the first responders, and they kept order in the most hostile political and social climate since 1968. Some of you have only read about 1968. I was 12 that year. I believe that it was a turning point in American history. My dad made me watch the news with him every night. Well, not every night. I resisted many nights, but many nights I watched with him. And here are some of the things that I saw. First, that spring, Martin Luther King Jr. was gunned down in Memphis, assassinated, and that led to all sorts of riots across our country. Within just a few months, Robert F. Kennedy, John's little brother, who was running for the presidency, was killed in California, and that led to all sorts of protests across our country. That August was maybe the one that scared me the most as just not even a teenage boy yet, because the Democratic National Convention, where generally people are just supposed to disagree with one another, even shout at one another in the halls, there was essentially virtually armed conflict in the streets of Chicago. It scared people for months. And then all year long, there were Vietnam War protests. My point is, I don't know that I can say 2020 and 2021 were as bad as 1968 or even worse. All I can say is any police officer serving in either of these two difficult times was facing a tough task. And all of these first responders, just like the healthcare professionals, risk their own welfare and behalf on all of us. I think that is exceptional courage. Now, what you may not know is that everyday heroes who are using exceptional courage and practicing it on our behalf are actually following in the footsteps of some of the greatest biblical characters of all. I think I would say it like this: courage is a hallmark of Jews and Christians over the centuries. All you have to do is read what we call the Old Testament or the Jewish scriptures to read about the courage of Jewish heroes, Israelite heroes. And all you have to do then is read the New Testament and read about the heroes that God placed in the church. Let me give you some examples. Let's start with Moses. Moses was born into the lap of luxury, being raised, even though he was a poor Jew, being raised in the home of the Egyptian Pharaoh. Pharaoh's daughter was kind of his surrogate mother, so to speak. Well, for 40 years, he had a good life, everything he wanted, until one day he was out roaming the streets as a powerful man, and he noticed that a very powerful Egyptian overlord was beating a Hebrew slave. He was so angry that he killed that Egyptian overlord, tried to clean it up, buried him right under the sand, hoped nobody saw, but people did see. And so they began chasing him for his life. He went almost 1,000 miles east into the sands of Saudi Arabia. And in that desert, he became an unknown shepherd for 40 years. At the age of 80, God came to him and said, Moses, it's time for me to free my people, all of my Israelite slaves, my children who are in Egypt. It's time for me to free them, but I got to have a person. And I'm looking at you, and you're my man of courage. And the whole book of Exodus and the whole story of the Exodus is the story of God using one stuttering, fearful man to become one of the great models of courage in all of human history. King David, before he was King David, was just a skinny little scrawny teenage boy who watched the sheep while his big brothers were on the military front fighting against the Philistines. One day, Father Jesse came and said, David, I want you to take a sandwich to the boys. It's probably falafel or something. And so he takes an entire meal to his big brothers. When he gets there, he hears the bellowing voice of a giant Philistine by the name of Goliath, who is taunting not only the Israelite army in which David's big brothers were serving, but he was also taunting the God of Israel, saying, your God must be awfully weak that he doesn't have any men that will come out here and fight me mano a mano. And so David says, why aren't y'all doing something? God's name is being embarrassed. And all the Israelite army guys said, look at him, he's a giant. He's really a giant and a giant. He will kill us. And David said, over my dead body, I will risk life and limb to protect God's reputation and our nation. And so he gets the sling and picks up 5 smooth rocks. He just needed one. And by the time he unloaded that first one, it sunk into Goliath's head and killed him. Courage that changed the direction of the history of Israel. If you're looking for courage in the Old Testament and the story of the Jews, there's no one better than a woman by the name of Esther. In some ways, she was just a typical late teenage, early young adult Jewish woman living in Persia during the time of the Jewish exile. One day, her uncle Mordecai came to her and said, Esther, I just want you to know that there's a beauty contest going on, and the king is going to anoint a new queen, and it's going to be this huge beauty contest nationwide, and whoever wins will be his queen, and I'll tell you now, you need to apply. Because Jews are being treated poorly. They're forgetting who we are, and we need someone in the royal court to remind him that we are God's people. So she goes, okay, I'll try out for the beauty contest. And the book of Esther, the few middle chapters that you read, a couple of middle chapters, are all about this beauty contest. And they put makeup on her and all the women who tried it for about a year, trying to make them look as great as they can. He comes out and chooses whom he wants to be his new queen. And the king of Persia chooses Esther. Well, you kind of think that's a great story. Little poor Jewish girl becomes the queen of Persia. But that really just sets up the real story. Because there was a man named Haman who was in the court of the king of Persia, and he was anti-Semitic. Not only did he hate Jews, but he wanted to kill them all. So he had come up with the second attempt in history, as far as we know, to completely destroy the nation of the Jews. The first time, of course, was when Pharaoh tried to do that and tried to kill all the Jewish boys and destroy an entire nation way back in Moses' day. But now, several hundred years later, Haman says, I'm going to kill all the Jews. When Mordecai hears it, he goes to his niece Esther and says, Esther, you're the queen. Who knows but God put you in this place for this particular time to speak up on our behalf to save our entire nation. And she says, I'll try. And she goes before the king, her husband, and she says, O king, Haman is about to kill all of us. Would you please save us? And by the grace of God, the king hears, answers, turns the tables, kills Haman, elevates Mordecai, and the Jews survived. Talk about courage. And the moment you turn the page of the Old Testament and go to the New Testament, there's Jesus, the only good man who ever lived, the only man who did everything to honor God, the only man who exemplified kingdom values constantly. And yet he faced crowds that were bitter, both Jewish and Roman. And he faced leaders that were ugly, both Jewish and Roman. And he finally went all the way through suffering, through beatings, to the point of crucifixion for one reason. He was willing to lay down his life and sacrifice himself for us. That's called courage. What I'm trying to say is that the Bible is filled with stories of people who showed exceptional courage. And I believe they are putting down the groundwork, putting down the footsteps for all who are called to show that same kind of exceptional courage in our world. And I'm thankful, and I know we are all thankful for all who have showed exceptional courage and sacrificed their welfare and were willing to sacrifice their lives for us over these last 18 months. But for every first responder who's shown exceptional courage and every healthcare professional who's shown exceptional courage, there are thousands of us who will never have the opportunity, we don't have the job that ever calls us to show exceptional courage, and what we're called to show is everyday courage. And when I talk about everyday courage, I mean that it is when you sacrifice your comfort and convenience for another person. Seldom your life, but comfort and convenience. Now, of course, it's not as dramatic. It's not as spectacular. In many ways, it's not as newsworthy. It's certainly not as dangerous as showing exceptional courage, but it's real and it's important. I have a friend in Birmingham named David. He married his college sweetheart, and for almost 30 years, they just had a wonderful marriage with growing up, raising up their kids to love Christ. And then when she turned 49, she developed early onset Alzheimer's, one of the earliest ages I've ever heard for Alzheimer's. And for the last 10 years, she's lived at home as he has watched her slowly slip away. Now, David works full time. He certainly has in other people to help on a regular basis. But the girls are grown, and David is still the primary caregiver. I call that courage, sacrificing his comfort and his convenience for the bride of his youth. When Preston Trail started, we reached lots of seekers who didn't know God, but we didn't have very many mature Christians who could help us lead the church. But in the summer of 2003, all of that changed when another startup church that had failed reached out to Jim and me to discuss a merger. By September and October of that year, 2003, over 20 families made a decision to join us. And that really changed the direction of our church in a positive way. One of those couples was Adam and Janelle Kimball. Here's a picture of them. They now live in Florida, but they were super faithful here while they were here. They had 2 little girls. Adam was a member of the Kid Street Gang, very athletic guy, loved to act and ham it up, and that was what we did with kids on the stage when we were at AMC Theater. Janelle was an administrative assistant, office manager, tasked with keeping Jim and me in line. And in 2005, she gave birth to their first son, Asher. They already had 2 little girls, but she gave birth to Asher. I went to Presbyterian Plano Hospital to visit them and to celebrate, but they weren't in the mood to celebrate. They'd just gotten back from seeing the doctor who told them that Asher had a very rare genetic disease called Williams syndrome. The prognosis was rough. Here's a picture of Asher now. He's 16. I read an article this week, and a story this week, a video, in fact, in Facebook that just reminded me of his life and helped me tell this story today. Many days in his life and in his parents' and his sister's life have moments of joy. Every day has not one, but dozens of challenges. And every day requires everyday courage. Most of us will never be called to show exceptional courage where we have to lay down our lives. All of us are called to show everyday courage where we lay down our convenience and our comfort to serve other people. And you may say, okay, Paul, if the Bible's filled with all these stories of exceptional courage, where in the Bible can we learn anything about just everyday courage? Great question. I found a scripture passage. I want to share it with you today. It comes out of 1 Corinthians chapter 16, 2 simple verses, verses 13 and 14. For all of you who say, oh, the Bible has verses too long for me to memorize, you're in luck. You can memorize this easily. Here it is, 2 simple verses, not even 20 words. Be on guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong, do everything with love. These are 5 quick commands for everyday courage. Let's look at each one. The first, be on guard. That means surprise attacks are going to come. Be ready. Don't get careless. Stay awake. Stay alert. Christians, there is a bullseye on your back. The world, the flesh, and the devil are all going to be coming after you because your life in the hands of God is a very positive thing in the kingdom of God. Your hands in the kingdom of God is a danger to the kingdom of evil, and God knows it, and the evil forces know it and want to neutralize you. On Thursday night of Passion Week, the night before Jesus' crucifixion, Simon Peter wasn't on guard. He forgot. And as a result, he denied Jesus 3 times. He forgot about surprise attacks. Second, stand firm in the faith. This means don't give up ground. You're going to be pushed, you're going to be cajoled, you're going to be tried, you're going to be tempted, but keep trusting God. That night before crucifixion, when Simon Peter was blowing it, Jesus was being faithful. He entered into the Garden of Gethsemane about 1 in the morning, and he said to the Lord, I know plan A, I'm to go to the cross. I'm asking you if plan B is a possibility. However, not my will, but yours. He trusted his heavenly Father, he obeyed, he stood firm in his faith. Then it says, be courageous and be strong. 2 of the most common commands in all of Scripture. Moses said it to the people of Israel when they're about to go into the promised land after wandering 40 years. God said it to Joshua when Joshua was about to go in with the Israelite army and try to conquer the land. Jesus said it to his disciples when the storm was swamping the boat out in the Sea of Galilee. And they wondered if this was the time of their deaths. Their life passed before their eyes. They looked out and there was a ghost walking on the water. It was Jesus. And he said, be strong, be courageous. And then finally it says, and do everything with love. I got to tell you, that surprised me. I didn't expect to see that. Because what in the world does love have to do with courage? Then I thought about our stories. Well, my friend David in Birmingham loves his wife. That's why he cares for her, courageously. Adam and Janelle love their little boy Asher. So they put him in the best schools and get him to the best therapists and try to equip him for the best future. The first responders that we know and love, they care for their community, and so they serve even when it's tough. And healthcare workers love their patients, and so they seek to make them whole. Now, you can try to have courage without love, but if you do, God is not impressed. In fact, he sees it as a 0. In fact, here's how the Apostle Paul said it. If I could speak all the languages of earth and of angels, but didn't love others, I would only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I had the gift of prophecy, and if I understood all of God's secret plans, and possessed all knowledge, and if I had such faith that I could move mountains, but didn't love others, I would be nothing. If I gave everything I had to the poor, and there's the courage moment, and even sacrificed my body, exceptional courage, I could boast about it, but if I didn't love others, I would have gained nothing. Courage and love, in God's eyes, always go together. And so I have 2 questions to ask you today. Where do you need to show courage in your life? It might be exceptional, it might be every day. But where do you need to show courage in your life? Would you think about that in a moment? Is there a place where you need to be, or a person with whom you need to be, sacrificing your comfort and your convenience for the glory of God and for their blessing? Who is it? What situation? Can you picture it? Second question, who has shown courage on your behalf and sacrificed for you? Have you thanked them? Or is it possible that you were so excited for their sacrifice for you that you kind of forgot to thank them because you just took it for granted? In the Gospel of Luke, Luke records an incredible story that I really think helps us understand this last thought I'm trying to say. It was a spring of AD 30. Jesus was on the way to Jerusalem with his disciples, and as he's going down to the southern part of Galilee and getting ready to head into Samaria, 10 lepers approach him. Leprosy was a terrible disease, and it kept you socially distant from everyone your whole life. These 10 lepers came before Jesus and said, Jesus, Master, please heal us. And Jesus said, so shall it be. Now go to the county health inspectors, which were the priests, and let them look at you, and they will pronounce you clean. So all 10 left. And now, while they're on their way, they look down and they discover that they're healed. I mean, all their little body parts are going back, and where their nose and cheeks had caved in were now being restored, and they couldn't believe it. Now, if you had had leprosy and you'd been healed, what would you do? I know what I would do. I would go to all those places where I'd been rejected. I'd go to the synagogue and say, hey, everybody, I can listen to the word of God being taught now because I'm whole. Don't make me leave. You can't. I'd go to the marketplace where people spat upon me. And I would say, look, I can buy things in your stall. I would go find my family, and I would hug them and hug them and hug them. Isn't that what you'd do? So I'm not hard on the 9 who never came back. But Jesus pointed out one who was a Samaritan, one leper who, as soon as he found out he was whole, returned. And the Bible said he went down on his knees and held Jesus' feet and said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." 16 months ago, I got a call from a Rooted group leader telling me about a couple in their group that was in crisis. She was on the boundary between life and death in a Plano hospital. The husband was not allowed because of COVID to come in to see her. So he was sitting in his car in the parking lot praying. I called and asked if I could come down. He said, "No need to. You can't do anything. You can't even come sit in my car at this moment. You can just pray. Pray where you are." I said, "Okay." As I listened to him talk, I realized that she had a very dicey future. I realized that his faith was awfully strong. And just a few weeks later, I found out more of the story. Here it is, by the grace of God.
Our names are Jeff and Shelley Reynolds.
On May 6th, 2020, I don't really remember what happened. I guess a little bit before 6 o'clock, I woke up 3 gasping breaths and fell back down, and Jeff started CPR and called 911. I was dead for 15 minutes, I was told. 2 fire trucks came, and the EMTs were able to get a femoral pulse, which enabled them to load me onto the ambulance and take me to the hospital. And I spent a week in the hospital, and I was on a cooling protocol that made me lose about 6 weeks of my memory in that time frame. It was a...
Lethal coronary event.
Yes. And I have a defibrillator put in, and I'm perfectly fine now.
We've had a very trying few years of our lives. Our Rooted group really became our spiritual foundation.
They were kind of a lifeline.
Yeah, and I felt their presence every step of the way through the very first 3 or 4 days when we just couldn't be with Shelley physically and didn't know how this was gonna turn out. And it could have gone either way. When you think that you've hit rock bottom and you think that you can't deal with much more, you learn that you can if you've got the help of others around you. That's what I found out, and I'm sure Shelley did when she, came to.
So many people brought food and everything, and I guess everyone liked Tiff's Treats cookies, and they just had a ton of them. So Lucas said, "We need to take a bunch of these cookies up to the firemen," and so they all did that. And when they were up there, they had said, "We would really love for you to come back with Shelley." And I was like, okay, I gotta get in the right frame of mind because, I'm a crier. So I had to be able to come to terms with it. And I don't know, what was it, 4 months?
Yeah, that's it.
It's probably about 4 months later. I was like, okay, I'm ready. And so they set up a lunch, and again, it was COVID, so we had to have our big tables out. We had to be 6 feet apart, but the guy who really brought me back to life, he came up to me and he said, "Can I give you a hug?" And I said, "Yes, I would love to." And so we just hugged each other and cried, and he said, so many people don't come back, and it's so important to us. And so we've made it a point to go back more often. And I didn't want to do this because I knew I'd be crying, but it's so important for people that, to go back and thank these guys for what they do.
It shocked us beyond belief to our core that not many people come back to thank them. So the moments where they have a victory, where things work out and it's the stars align and prayers are answered, you got to believe, want to celebrate those moments more so than anything, because it gives them hope and it gives them direction that all the training and all the work that they do is meaningful, and that people really appreciate it. Our request and our mission to a lot of people is, hey, spend 5-10 minutes and just go back and be appreciative of their work and their life's work, because it means so much to them, but
it means so much to you.
Yeah,
what I got out of it was awesome.
Yep.